Hello there. One of the most common asked questions at this time of the year, springtime, is which compost do I use for this, for that? And I agree, it is a bit confusing, so I'll give you a little history lesson first of all. In the early 20th century, in 1926, a man called John Innes decided to standardize composts, to make them all to a set formula. And he introduced a sowing compost, a number 1 potting compost, a number 2 potting compost, and a number 3 potting compost. So what is a compost? It can be anything really. It's something that holds the right proportion, the right amount of air for oxygen and moisture. Without those two, plants will not survive. So we've got the sowing compost, which is only suitable really for seed because it contains very, very little food. Then you come to the John Innes number 1, which is, as it says, a young plants compost, which would probably keep it going for the first 4 or 5 weeks. If you want to then transplant it into a bigger pot, you would use a potting on compost, which would feed for 5 or 6 weeks. And if you had quite a large plant, you'd need a stronger compost. Remember, these contain different amounts of foods. Number 3 times number 1, number 2 twice number 1. So what happens if we want to carry on feeding after that? This is when we start using these slow release fertilizers. So we can add this to the compost. All our trees and shrubs have this added slow release fertilizer, which will release food for up to 6 months. And it's a very convenient way of doing it. If you just want to feed some bedding plants for a few weeks, you can use the liquid fertilizer, which will last for 4 or 5 weeks. But you should keep doing that every week. Specialist composts, we have the ericaceous for acid loving plants. And again, we have an acid slow release fertilizer. So it's fairly logical. It depends what size the plants are and how long they have to stay in the pot. The added advantage of John Innes, because it contains soil, it's quite heavy and the plants will not be blown over. So I often see customers picking up this bag when they want to pot some plants. And this is called topsoil. And it is not a compost at all. It is just soil which has been sterilized. And what happens to a topsoil in a pot? It loses its structure, doesn't hold any air or water, and becomes very hard and is no good. This is fine for using in the garden. So what compost should we use now? What does John Innes contain? It's a mixture of soil, peat and sand, all to a set formula so that it holds the right amount of oxygen and air and moisture. So it's pretty straightforward. Which do we use for different purposes? You've all heard of multi-purpose composts. They are usually based on peat. Now there's a lot of talk at the moment about sustainability and the use of peat in the garden. And here at Fron we have changed over from the peat compost to the non-peat compost, this silver grow. Again, it was a formula of bark, shredded bark, mulching materials, and even grass cuttings. But it certainly works. And here at Fron we've changed all our production over. All our bedding plants are now produced in the silver grow. We trialled it last year and it's worked out very well indeed. Right, I'm going to just pot some young plants now. And the first question, of course, is which compost do I use? So I'm going to use this peat-free compost which, as you can see, although it contains no peat at all, it certainly looks like peat, but it isn't. But as I said earlier, the right amount of oxygen and moisture. Right, so I'm going to plant a nice little container which you can put on your patio. You notice these colour pots now are quite different from what they used to be. These are the ones which can be recycled, and the council really should collect them, but we have got to have talk with the council first. Now, I've just forgotten, I should just put a little bit of this slow release, which is going to feed it for a little bit longer. I'll just mix that in. Ideally, water the plants before you pot them up, and water again once you've finished. Mixture of evergreen ferns, a dianthus, a daisy, and a heather. And just to give it a bit of colour, might as well pop in a daffodil. Just one little gap left, and a little trailing ivy over the edge. There you are, it doesn't take long. Now, I could have used a John Innes number 2. I could have used an ordinary multi-purpose compost, but in this case I've chosen to use the peat-free Silver Grow. So give that a good soaking afterwards, and it should last for weeks and weeks. Finally, I'm going to plant something which is going to stay in this pot potentially for years. I've got a nice little pot here, a few crocks over the bottom so the hole doesn't block, and I'm going to use, since this is an azalea, a special kind of compost, an ericaceous potting compost. Remember, these ericaceous John Innes compost contain a bit of sand, soil and peat. This is the one I'm going to plant. It's a lovely foliage on this, dark foliage. Don't plant it too deeply. Not quite deep enough. It's worth taking a bit of time to get the level just right. There we are. Now, just going to work the compost round the edge of the plant. So this will be in the pot potentially for 3 or 4 years. What is important, this compost contains enough food for the first year. Each spring we will add a bit of a slow release fertilizer, which will keep it going for that year. Just firm the compost slightly, and if it does settle after watering, you just need to top up the compost again.